Iran was sitting on 460 kilograms of enriched uranium. But what does that number actually mean? Hiroshima needed just 64 kilograms to destroy an entire city. Iran had enriched uranium for up to 11 nuclear bombs, and they kept adding more every single day. Even while the world was still talking peace, so was Iran negotiating for peace, or buying time.
You've probably seen that number floating around in the headlines, 460 kilograms. It's about Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium. And yeah, that sounds like a lot, but what does it really mean? Let's break it down, because the real story here is way more interesting than just a single number.
Okay, so there it is, 460 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. Now, just as a number, it's kind of hard to grasp the scale. So to really understand the weight of that figure, let's put it next to a number from history.
The nuclear device used over Hiroshima back in 1945, that had about 64 kilograms of uranium in it. So Iran's stockpile was nearly 7 times that amount. Yeah. When you see those two numbers side by side, it definitely raises a pretty urgent question, doesn't it?
So what does this actually mean? Because here's the thing, numbers on their own don't tell you the whole story. To have a functional nuclear weapon, you actually need 3 things: enough material, the right kind of material, and of course the know-how to build the thing. They had the quantity, sure, but those other 2 factors? Well, that's what we're going to dig into. Okay, first things first. To get a handle on this, we've got to understand who's actually calling the shots. You see, Iran's nuclear program isn't just one person or one group. It's a pretty complex machine with a few key parts.
So, down at the ground level, you have the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran. These are the scientists, the engineers, the people in lab coats doing all the super technical work. Then you've got the Iranian government. They're the ones funding the whole thing and dealing with all the international pressure and diplomacy. But, and this is the important part, the final say, every single big decision rests with one person, the supreme leader. An easy way to think about it is like a huge company, right? The scientists are the workers on the factory floor. The government is middle management. And the supreme leader, he's the CEO, the sole decision maker. Nothing significant happens without his green light.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the science. This word, enriched, gets thrown around all the time, but what does it actually mean? Honestly, this is the absolute core of the whole issue.
So, when you dig uranium out of the ground, it's mostly not the stuff you want. Only a tiny fraction of it, like 0.7%, is this active component called uranium-235. And at that low a level, it's not useful for much of anything. You can't power a city with it, and you certainly can't build a weapon. You have to boost that concentration way up. I love this analogy because it makes it so simple. Think about making orange juice from one of those frozen cans. What do? You get rid of all the extra water, and what's left behind is way more potent, right? Well, uranium enrichment is kind of like that. You're separating out the less useful stuff to concentrate the really powerful uranium-235. To power a nuclear reactor for electricity, you only need to enrich it to about 3 to 5%. Iran's stockpile, though, was at 60%. And to be considered weapons grade, you've got to hit 90%. Now here is the most crucial part of this whole thing. Getting from 0.7% to 60% is the really hard part. That last jump, from 60 to 90, relatively speaking, that's a sprint. They've already done the marathon. So, why does that 60% number make diplomats and security experts lose so much sleep? It all comes down to one critical concept, and you've probably heard it before: breakout time. Breakout time is basically the answer to the question, if they decided to go for it right now, how long would it take to get enough material for one bomb? A decade ago, that window was maybe a year, which gave people time to talk, to use diplomacy. But once you have a big pile of 60% enriched uranium, that window shrinks fast, from months down to maybe just a few weeks. And this is where things get really murky. You've got the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA. And after Iran stopped their continuous monitoring back in 2022, the agency put out this chillingly precise statement. They said they had lost continuity of knowledge. In plain English, that means their inspectors had no idea what was happening inside some of Iran's most important facilities. They were flying blind. This created a massive dilemma. On one hand, the IAEA had to say, look, we have not confirmed an active weapons program. That was the verified fact. But on the other hand, they were also saying, but we can't check anymore.
It's that huge gap between what was known for sure and what was suddenly unknown that just ratcheted up all the international tension.
Of course, a situation this complicated didn't just pop up out of nowhere. This is actually the climax of a story that's been going on for decades. So let's just quickly rewind the tape a bit.
Believe it or not, Iran's program actually started before 1979 with help from the West for civilian energy. After the revolution, it basically went dark, moving forward outside of any real oversight. Then in the 2010s, you had those big international deals that limited enrichment in return for lifting sanctions. But when those agreements fell apart, Iran put the pedal to the metal, and that's what led directly to that big 60% stockpile. So let's circle all the way back to our big question. Does this 460 kilogram stockpile mean Iran had a nuke? Well, the answer is, it's a lot more complicated than a simple yes or no.
Here's one last analogy, and it's a really good one. Having all that highly enriched uranium is like having a giant bag of flour in your kitchen. You've got the main, absolutely essential ingredient. But, as we all know, flour by itself isn't bread. You still need the recipe, you need an oven, and you need to know how to bake.
So what was missing from the recipe? 3 huge things. First, that final sprint to get the material up to 90%. Second, the incredibly complicated engineering to actually design and build the device. And third, you need a reliable way to deliver it. Iran had the flour, for sure, but just how far along they were on the rest of the recipe, well, that was a subject of massive debate. And this brings us right back to the central tension of this whole story. The official, verified fact from the IAEA was no confirmed weapons program. But the risk assessment from the international community was that the breakout time was dangerously short. And that gap right there between the hard fact and the potential risk, that's what made this situation so incredibly fragile.
Ultimately, that 460 kilogram stockpile was never just about a number. It was about how far a country had moved down a very specific and dangerous path. And the question of exactly how far down that road any nation is and what they plan to do next, well, that remains one of the heaviest, most consequential questions in the entire world today.